Chair Rocha, you can go ahead and start. We are live.
All righty. I call to order this meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to those who are joining us via the live stream video. We're meeting again in an all virtual format, so one quick reminder on our meeting protocol. If you wish to speak, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom or alert Ms. Flatten. Before we turn to our agenda, I'd like to welcome our student representatives. We have with us today Student Representative Buttar and Student Representative DeMuth. Thank you both for being here, and we will now turn to our agenda. Our first item is the external audit report. We're joined by our controller, Sue Paulson, and Katie Knudsen and Judy Dockendorf from Deloitte. Thank you all for being here today. Ms. Paulson, would you like to lead us off, and then you may turn it over to our partners from Deloitte.
Good morning, Chair Rocha and committee members. Before I turn the presentation over to Deloitte, I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes providing a brief summary of the life cycle of the engagements. Typically, we start planning in March or April for all of the engagements with Deloitte. This year we started in April. We had 5 engagements with Deloitte, and all of the planning as well as the subsequent fieldwork was conducted virtually by both the Deloitte and the University of Minnesota team. We had separate kickoff meetings for each one of the engagements, and these kickoff meetings is where we discuss logistics, where we establish timelines for due dates and ultimate plans for issuance of the reports. It's also the opportunity where management will share any process or procedure changes, where we'll chat with Deloitte about regulatory changes related to the specific engagement that we're working on. And it's really our opportunity to proactively discuss management's methodology related to, sorry, apparently my cuckoo clock is 2 minutes late. It's really our opportunity to discuss management's methodology related to any process or procedure changes that we have, those regulatory changes, and our implementations and decisions and approaches to those. These are proactive conversations and meant to bring to light any concerns to those process or procedure changes or any regulatory changes or management's methodology in the implementation. When we have new transactions or new accounting standards, we generally have a proactive or a collaborative approach where we worked with Deloitte through those items well in advance of year end. So when we get to the actual audit work, at year end, we generally, and I'm going to knock on wood here, we generally won't have a finding or an adjustment because we've been proactively working and having those conversations early on when implementing a new transaction or any accounting standard changes. A good example of a upcoming accouning standard change is GASB 87 related to leases. We will proactively discuss our approach with Deloitte, assure that they understand our methodology and approach, and then we'll be able to gauge their comfort level with our implementation methodology and decisions. That specific GASB implementation is slated for fiscal year end 2022. We have 2 types of field work that we do. There's interim as well as final field work. We worked with Deloitte to identify selections and testing that they can complete during the summer months rather than leaving all of the testing and selections for the fall. During the final field work for all of the engagements, which takes place in the fall, and until report issuance, we have weekly status meetings with Deloitte and the specific subject matter experts related to the engagements. This is where we're going to walk through the status of the schedules and the underlying documentation that supports those schedules. This is where we're going to get requests from Deloitte related to additional information or additional testing that they might want to conduct, and where we'll be actively discussing any issues or concerns. We have separate communications and separate meetings this year, all Zoom meetings, when there are questions related to any specific schedules or any of the underlying documentation that we've provided. Upon completion of Deloitte's internal review of the audit documentation, Deloitte has a series of partner reviews. We'll receive and review the draft reports. It's our opportunity to provide any comments, and ultimately Deloitte is going to issue that final report. And while these reports are a culmination of months of collective effort by both the university and the Deloitte team, the reports are also a real reflection of the university's control environment, which includes such things as policies, procedures, systems, approvals, oversight activities, report preparation, and the list goes on, because there's a lot of activities that relate to the internal control environment of the university. While the planning and process of the engagements is typically the same year after year, the underlying financial information and all the documentation that we provide generally isn't the same. And we often have additional requests from Deloitte for information. So to give you a flavor of the work and the requests that go into engagement and field work, I'll provide some metrics around the financial statements. We did accelerate the timeline for the financial statements this year. So the Finance and Operations Committee would receive the financial results sooner. In the past, the financial statements are first seen by the Board of Regents at the December meeting. We issued 10 days prior to the previous year while both teams, the Deloitte team and the university teams, were working from home. We provided 441 items to Deloitte during the engagement. 9 of those items were the actual statements themselves, 160 journal entries with the underlying documentation, 40 flex schedules, 27 footnotes and related work papers, 65 supporting work papers. In addition to what that's what we generally always provide. And in addition to that, Deloitte had additional requests. At interim timeframe, we supplied an additional 39 work papers, at year end 33, and 68 ad hoc work papers. So there's a significant amount of documentation that we provide Deloitte, and they review and test just for one engagement. And with that, Chair Rocha, that ends the summary of the life cycle of the engagements, and I'll turn it over to Deloitte for their report.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Rocha. This is Judy Dockendorf with Deloitte. I will start walking through our presentation for you and the committee this morning. Maggie, if you could post our slides. And if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So as Controller Paulson mentioned, we have completed our audit of the financial statements as of and for the year ended June 30th, 2020. And we issued our opinion on the financial statements on October 21st, 2020. We've put together these materials for you today to communicate the results of the financial statement audit and then to provide an update on the remaining audit and other related work that we were engaged to perform for 2020. If you could go to the next slide. Thank you. This slide summarizes our responsibility under generally accepted auditing standards. That responsibility is to express an opinion on the fairness of the preparation of the university's financial statements. Our report that was issued in October on the 2020 financial statements includes an unmodified or clean opinion on the university's financial statements for fiscal 20. Further, while we did consider internal controls over financial reporting in designing our audit procedures, we do not express an opinion on the operating effectiveness of internal controls. So we look to understand that internal controls are appropriately designed and implemented, but we do not actually issue an opinion regarding the effectiveness of internal controls. If you could go to the next slide. Here's a quick snapshot of significant accounting policies and accounting estimates. Significant accounting policies followed by the university are disclosed within Note 1 to the consolidated financial statements. In the current year, we are not aware of any significant changes in accounting policies, and there were no new accounting standards adopted this year. We have evaluated the qualitative aspects of the significant accounting policies, noting that they are appropriately disclosed and consistently applied in the financial statements. Accounting estimates are integral in the financial statements as well, and I'll provide a little more insight on the significant estimate around investment valuation and our key focus areas when I get to Appendix A. If you could go on to the next slide. Our audit of the financial statements is designed to obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements are not materially misstated, which, as I mentioned, is evidenced through our issuance of the unmodified opinion on the financial statement. However, during the course of this year's audit, there were 3 uncorrected misstatements identified, and each of those are summarized here. The first item relates to an understatement of investments and the associated net change in fair market value of those investments. When I talk about our procedures over investments later on in the presentation, I'll note that part of our procedures revolves around getting confirmations from investment managers over the valuation of those investments. And this misstatement arose due to late confirmations and valuations that were provided to the university. Given the small amount of the difference here, you can see it was $4 million, management chose not to correct this misstatement. The second item was an overstatement of current accrued liabilities and other, and an understatement of non-current accrued liabilities and other. Given the fact that this just impacted the balance sheet and was just a misclassification between current and non-current, it was determined not to be material for correcting in the financial statements for 2020. And the third item relates to correction of a prior period error. During 2020, as management was going through their closing process, they identified an error related to revenues and expenses previously unrecognized for an administration program that spanned a number of years. In correcting those prior period errors in the current year, that results in an overstatement of revenues and understatement of expenses in the current year. However, there was no impact to net position as of June 30th, 2020, and all amounts are now correctly presented. Each of these misstatements was determined by management and agreed to by Deloitte to be immaterial in aggregate and, immaterial individually and in aggregate to the financial statements, and that's why they remained uncorrected at the end of the year. You go on to the next slide. Here's a quick snapshot of the other services outside of the financial statement audit that we were engaged to perform related to 2020. And I will move into detail on the next 2 slides on each of these. If you could go to the next slide, Maggie. Thank you. The first item here is the Uniform Grant Federal Compliance Audit. If you recall, this is required for entities that expend more than $750,000 annually in federal expenditures. The university's expenditures over the last number of years have exceeded $1 billion, so we have continued to perform the federal compliance audit. In 2020, the university continues to qualify as a low-risk auditee, and this is determined based on past audit results, as well as timely filing of the compliance audit and related information with the Office of Management and Budget. In the current year, our scope includes 6 major programs, including both the Research and Development Cluster as well as Student Financial Aid. Our procedures are in process, and those procedures that we perform are specified by the Office of Management and Budget. Our procedures are substantially complete related to the ongoing and kind of normal procedures we'd perform over compliance, but we are awaiting a final addendum on specific guidance we may need to perform over any COVID-related funds. And we've continued to wait with bated breath here with management as to when that might come from the government. We hope to issue these reports either yet in December or early January. They are due at the end of March. The second item here is the examination we perform over related to the Office of Higher Education for the state of Minnesota. Our procedures here focus on state financial aid that's awarded to students in examining if that aid was 1, awarded to eligible students, and 2, awarded at correct amounts. We have completed our procedures and are in the process of issuing our reports. Here we do issue separate reports for each of the campuses, so we'll issue 4 reports to the state of Minnesota here. Moving on to the next slide. So a snapshot here of the agreed upon procedures engagements that we have been engaged to perform. The first two relate to procedures for the NCAA. The NCAA puts out guidance every year for Division I and II institutions regarding procedures that need to be performed. The Twin Cities, for Division I institutions, we do this every year. And for Crookston, this is done once every 3 years. Procedures involve making selections of review and expenditure transactions and ensuring that those were made in accordance with compliance with the NCAA guidelines that are issued for all Division I and II institutions. Our procedures are substantially complete for both of these, and we plan to issue our reports yet in December here, both for Twin Cities and Crookston. And then the last item here, on a biannual basis, we're engaged to perform agreed upon procedures to assess the university's compliance with state of Minnesota laws for the Mayo Partnership in Regenerative Medicine. Our procedures here consist of making a sample selection of expenditures and ensuring those were made in accordance with Minnesota state laws and the partnership with Mayo. Our report was issued in September 2020 and is included in your materials for the Audit and Compliance Committee meeting this morning. And there were no findings identified as a result of this procedure. And then I'd move into the appendix if we could. You could go to the next slide. Just a few additional items related to the financial statement audit itself. If you'll recall from our audit plan presentation and previous audits, management override of controls is a significant risk and a fraud risk for all audit engagements. So it doesn't rise to a higher level at the university because of anything we've seen, but our auditing standards require that we perform specific procedures to address the risk of management override of control. Those procedures are listed here and include inquiries, understanding the design and implementation of internal controls, so ensuring that there are appropriate segregation of duties, that there are appropriate reviews and approvals of expenditures, of account reconciliations, of the financial statements. And then we actually perform testing of journal entries that are made. So we get a population of journal entries made during the year, and we'll make a selection of those and ensure that there's no indication of management override there. Additionally, in judgments or estimates that are made, we look to ensure there's no management override. There isn't one year where we're maybe high in the range of an estimate and then the next year we're going lower, that there's consistency in the application of accounting policies. Based on all the procedures we performed, there was no indication of management override of controls in 2020. You can move on to the next slide. And then the other significant risk we identify relates to the valuation of alternative investments. The investments balance for the university is obviously very significant. And of that balance, a little over half of the $2.1 billion of investments at the end of June is held in alternative investments. So investments in private capital, fixed income funds, real estate investments, hedge funds, where the valuation of those investments isn't as easy as just going out to NASDAQ and getting a stock price. Our procedures to assess the valuation of the investments include starting from the beginning of understanding the portfolio of investments, the investment managers that are used, and their process for valuing these alternative investments. As I mentioned earlier, we send confirmations to assess the value that investment managers are providing on each individual portfolio or investment. And then we also review the latest audited financial statements for any funds underlying those investments. We additionally perform benchmarking testing to do some independent analysis of the valuations, and also look at purchases and sales during the year and near year end of investment balances. Based on the work that we did not identify any assumptions or methods that were not reasonable or appropriate in valuing investments. And then Appendix B on the next slide just has some required communications, other required communications, And here I'd say there's really nothing to highlight. As Controller Paulson noted, we performed all the work this year remotely, so we certainly appreciate everyone's help as we moved through the audit procedures remotely, and we had no difficulties encountered in getting information we needed or in accessing personnel to answer questions for us as they may have arisen during the audit. So that is the end of the prepared remarks we'd have, Chair Rocha, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that report. Any comments or questions from committee members? Please use the raise hand feature or alert Ms. Flatten if you wish to be recognized. Or feel free to just, I think if you just speak up.
Regent Davenport has a hand raised.
Thank you. Regent Davenport, please.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. Good morning, everyone. I just want to emphasize a small point that was made, which is huge in terms of significance. And that is that we are viewed as low risk by OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. That it doesn't take much to get on their radar. And once you're on their radar, it's hard to get off sometimes. So I just want to give a shout out to all the processes we have in place with a significant budget and that comment that was made. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, we've talked about this in our preparatory meetings for these, that we've had such great reports in these last couple of years, and on the one hand, it makes you nervous when an organization is this size of what's out there, but I think more significantly, as you just point out, there's been a lot of great work done that's put us in this position, and so thank you for that commentary. Anybody else? Any other comments?
Mr. Chair, Regent Kenyanya has a hand raised.
Regent Kenyanya, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Dockendorf, Ms. Knudsen, for the presentation. I had a brief question. You mentioned that issuing an opinion on the effectiveness of controls doesn't happen, and I mean that's not in scope for an annual financial audit. But is that something that's possible separate from that? And would that just be a change in the nature of the engagement? And this might be a question for the controller, but just imagining that since we have this external point of view that's in there, and you guys do have a chance to get a look at the controls and whatnot, that would it be possible? And I don't know if it's just not in the nature of that engagement to issue something like that separate from that.
Controller Paulson, would you care to field this first and send it wherever you would think is appropriate?
Sure. I'll ask our external auditors, Dockendorf and Katie Knudsen, to also step in here. I do believe that if it's something that the university wanted to do, we could certainly engage some firm to do that. And Judy or Katie, I don't know if you guys want to add anything specific on related to that activity.
Sure, Chair Rocha, Regent Kenyanya, it would be possible. It would be a significant amount of work. It looks like Mr. Volna's raising his hand. It would be something that we could do. It's not in the scope, it's not a requirement, and not something we generally do for non-public entities, so non-SEC registered companies where it's required. One thing I would note, if we were to identify anything that rose to a significant deficiency or a material weakness, that's something that we absolutely would communicate with you, even though we're not issuing an opinion itself on internal controls. But
Please continue. I didn't know if you wanted to turn to Mr. Volna now, if he's looking to get in, or if you were.
Sure, it looks like Mr. Volna would like to.
Mr. Volna, please.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. Regent Kenyanya and others. Sue Paulson is correct. We could certainly look at doing a separate audit of internal controls. What Deloitte does during the course of their work is really evaluate whether the controls in place will result in fairly stated and fairly presented financial statements. So if we were going to do a separate audit of the controls, we would want to step back and say, what is the purpose and goal of that type of evaluation? You put internal controls in place for a variety of reasons. Accuracy of your financial reports, safeguarding of your assets, reliability of the information that people use, and so forth. And so preventing fraud, all those kinds of things. And so what we would want to do is say, let's sort of define the scope so that we're not evaluating these things so broadly that it becomes a very, very large and expensive effort. But having said that, if there's a particular interest in our control environment on the part of the Audit and Compliance Committee, we can certainly have a conversation about how you would want to go about evaluating that through Deloitte's work or whatever.
Regent Kenyanya?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all the answers. That makes sense, and I guess I wasn't requesting that. I know that, you know, a lot of our stuff is covered by internal audit, and maybe I misunderstood the situation, but you know, I just imagine that Ms. Dockendorf and Ms. Knudsen have thoughts, you know, in their professional opinion that maybe just aren't going to show through the actual, you know, statement. And like, yeah, I'd love if they'd whisper them in our ears or something, or issue something separate. But I'm understanding that that's not really how such an engagement would work. But I would welcome an email from either of you for any other any other thoughts you have. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see.
Ms. Knudsen, please.
Regent Kenyanya, I would just like to add one thing, just to make sure that it's clear that Ms. Dockendorf said in her presentation that we absolutely understand the internal control environment. We absolutely look at the design of internal controls and that those are implemented. The last step that we do not do is issue an opinion on internal controls. So we certainly do a lot of work around internal controls. And in the future, if it would be helpful for us to maybe educate the committee just on our process and the types of controls we look at and those sorts of things, we're happy to do that.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. Ms. Flotten, any other individuals desiring to speak?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right, well, thank you. Well, we'll continue to move on to our second item in what we hope will be a robust discussion. Regent Kenyanya and I are looking for ideas and suggestions from committee members for future committee discussion. And Chief Auditor Klatt is seeking guidance on future work of the internal audit team as they are working without a formal audit plan in this fiscal year. After our discussion today, Chief Auditor Klatt will review our suggestions for potential additions to the internal audit plan for the year and will report back to the committee on which items will or will not be moving forward. Topics recommended for future committee agenda items will be considered by Regent Kenyanya and I, and we will consult with Chief Auditor Klatt. Chief Auditor Klatt, I'll turn it over to you for a brief update on internal audit activities, and then we'll move on to a discussion. Chief Auditor Klatt.
Excellent, thank you. Chair Rocha, members of the Audit Committee. On page 22 of your docket material, which Maggie, if we could get that pulled up, that would be great. I provided an update to the status report that we provided to you in September, where we laid out the audits that were in process at the time, those that were on the docket, so to speak, for to be completed, and other audits that were contemplated to occur later in the fiscal year. And so since September, we have completed a number of the audits, 7 of them, and also under the audits report pending, we recently issued reports on the Anatomy Bequest Program, our review of CARES Act compliance, our review of the NCAA compliance and operational programming of baseball and softball programs on the Twin Cities campus, UMarket, the university's electronic procurement system, and then the School of Business and Economics on the University of Minnesota Duluth campus. So those reports were issued in the last several days since the submission of the docket material. We have a number of audits that is included in the next section that are currently in process. 3 of them are COVID related, 2 address emerging compliance areas. And then we are undergoing audits of the College of Science and Engineering's Dean Office in anticipation of the Dean's retirement. Northrop and Human Resources at the University of Minnesota Duluth. In addition to the normal routine full scope audits that have been performed, we've done limited, what we call our SNAP reviews, intended to be snappy and quick. And those have been focused primarily on changes and procedures that the institution has made during the period of the pandemic. And those changes reflect relaxation of certain federal regulatory requirements, actions taken by the Board of Regents in terms of furloughs and pay reductions, and travel. And our objective in doing those SNAP reviews is to make sure that the community is adhering to the policy requirements for each of those specific areas. So we have a couple SNAP reviews that are currently in process as well. Going to page 23, please, Maggie. We have potential audits that are on the docket, and most of these we're actually just waiting for time to elapse because we need to get to a certain point to have a sufficient amount of activity in order to provide audit coverage, or because the units involved under the routine unit and process audits have determined that undergoing an audit would be better suited in the winter months. So we've got them kind of penciled into a schedule, but we in most cases are just waiting. We do have one audit we had originally on our contemplated plan, and that was to audit compliance with the Sunrise plans that were put in place to bring people back to campus. And we did preliminary planning around that audit topic and reviewed the process and reviewed what the Sunrise plans included. And in thinking about how we would go about testing those plans, it just did not seem practical to do that because we would need to go to a number of various areas within the on campus, which we're trying not to go on campus. And the variation in those areas, staffing and their activities, we just didn't think that we would really get meaningful information about compliance with those plans. The plans themselves, we found that we reviewed, were comprehensive. They were thoughtful. They addressed the critical needs of employees coming back on campus and how work would proceed given the safety and employee health and wellness that needed to be considered. So we just decided to not pursue doing that particular audit. So with that as a backdrop in terms of what we've completed that we laid out in September, what we have currently in process, what's on our radar at the moment, we would just welcome any suggestions, any areas that the board, that the audit committee members have an interest in having audit coverage provided for. Really, and your input has been really important in creating the list you currently are looking at. We try to be very attentive to your discussions during other committee meetings and the board meetings to identify areas that are of interest. And so your input is very important. We also, of course, speak to administrative leaders to to also query them about areas of concern that they would like audit attention provided and build that in as well. So with that, I will, for this part of the section, before we move to the audit committee work plan itself, I would welcome any input you might have.
Thank you. Let's turn to discussion. And again, please use the raise hand feature or alert Ms. Flatten if you would like to speak. Ms. Flatten, do we have any takers at this point? Regent
Looks like Regent Shu and Regent Swigum also has a hand raised.
Thank you. Regent Shu and then Regent Swigum.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm interested in learning more about areas that internal audit does not oversee. Therefore, the committee may not receive much or any information about. My understanding is that the investigation of academic misconduct and research misconduct are not audited by Gail's team, and there's probably others that I don't even know about. I'm interested in learning more about these areas and would propose that the committee leadership and Gail consider adding these to a future discussion. And I believe that we should include an overview of maybe the process and other information such as the number of investigations that take place and where that information ends up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regent Shu. Chief Auditor Klatt, is that, we had a brief conversation in preparation for this meeting on this topic. Could you speak a little bit to that? Because it's, certainly for those of us that are on our first trip around the cycle on this committee, how does that work in those areas that, we can talk specifically about what Regent Shu just mentioned in terms of academic misconduct, research misconduct, and then the sort of the more general concept about things that are not covered by our internal audit function, how we would know whether something is covered or is not covered, and sort of the thought process methodology that leads us to areas that are covered versus those that are not. Could you address that for the committee?
Certainly, Chair Rocha and members of the committee. This perhaps will come across as rather general, but I'm going to start there and we can drill down. Generally, we do not audit things related to scholarly work. So we do not audit things related to scientific research. That is not our expertise. If there is a case where there's an allegation of scientific misconduct, the Vice President for Research would review that and generally will bring in, if it is warranted, a panel of experts to review those situations and provide guidance on whether academic misconduct or scientific misconduct has actually occurred. Similar in academic misconduct, those processes are very faculty driven and are reviewed by a panel of their peers. And we are not involved in either one of those. We don't look at curriculum. We don't look at the things that are assigned responsibility to the faculty as a general statement.
Thank you. And I don't know if this is consistent with where Regent Shu is going on this, but to my mind, it's not a function of internal audit conducting the investigation or evaluating whether there was misconduct. It's really a review of the investigation. Is the investigation being run consistent with the rules? Is it being done fairly? And does that, if that makes sense, I don't know that Regent Shu, I didn't get the sense that you were suggesting that internal audit would insert itself in making the ultimate decision whether misconduct occurred, but whether the process for evaluating whether misconduct occurred was consistent with what should be done based on either our rules or based on best practices. Am I tracking that right, Regent Shu?
Yes, that's correct.
And so taking it back then to Chief Auditor Klatt, is there a prospect, or has it ever been done that internal audit has reviewed the processes that we've used to evaluate these, significant matters in an academic environment?
Regent Rosha, no, we have not. And subsequent to our earlier conversation, I did query my Big Ten colleagues as well as colleagues at other research universities, and none of them have done that work either. So it could be done for sure, but it is not a common practice.
And to use kind of the worst case scenario, in a situation that one of our Big Ten peers had a few years back with an individual inside the organization that was committing terrible acts of misconduct in relation to young folks, that it becomes a question. Unfortunately, the review of whether the processes are being conducted well oftentimes waits till there's a calamity, and then it becomes kind of almost an external body comes in to take a look. And so it seems that there would be some value in us sort of monitoring the monitors, if you will, to ensure that it's being done objectively and consistent with rules. And so that may be something that we could talk about going forward, whether that is a possibility. All right, Regent Hsu, unless you have anything additional, I'll turn to Regent Sviggum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair Rosha. Chair Rosha, if you remember about 18 months ago, I sent you a little note about the potential of 3 different areas that we could audit. I see none of them made the list on the SNAP list or the potential audit list that was given to Gail by me, or to us this morning. And so I just will ask specifically about a couple of them. The one being the Promise Scholarship. We spend as an institution somewhere, I think, in the neighborhood of 30 million plus a year on the Promise Scholarship. And I'd like us to at least consider looking at the $30 million of Promise Scholarship, how effective it is, the performance of those students that do receive it. Do they graduate in 4 years or 5 years? I'd just like to see the effectiveness of the Promise Scholarship. And, questions such as how does it redistribute tuition paying student money from one tuition paying student to another tuition paying student? I think we should be aware of that, Chair Rosha, in regards to the effect of our students and the tuition they pay. Suggestion 1. Suggestion 2, and I think it would be timely, just because we have entered into a hiring freeze and hiring pause. I think it was changed from freeze to pause for whatever reason I don't know, but I'm sure there is a reason. 2 years ago in our budget that we approved as a board, we gave authority to, I think it wasn't human resources, it was probably finance, to look at all persons that would be leaving the university for whatever reason, and giving them the authority to approve hiring of new individuals for replacement. The report we got back was it was fairly unsuccessful. I don't know if it was unsuccessful because of a cumbersome process that was initiated, or was unsuccessful because the heart wasn't really in it to reduce our workforce at the university. Maybe the heart wasn't there. I don't know, but certainly I think it would be timing, Chair Rosha, in regards to the hiring pause that we're in right now, and just to review, not to place blame on anybody, but at least to find out what happened and why it was unsuccessful. So just a couple of suggestions to put in the SNAP list.
Thank you, Regent Sviggum. And we, again, in our conversation, did bring up the matters that you raised last year. I think it was sometime in the September timeframe. And Chief Auditor Klatt, did you want to speak to this? I have a thought that I want to interject as well, but I'll turn to Chief Auditor Klatt if she wants to comment on your remarks.
We will take all the suggestions that people are making and look at them relative to the other work that we have planned. And I think we had already anticipated doing audit work around the hiring freeze as well as, or pause, as well as around the Rio. Again, that's something that we're waiting for time to expire since the Rio, the deadline is that those folks would be leaving the institution in January. So we need to wait for that change to occur and then see what happens with replacement of those individuals. But we had already contemplated that. So I think that that for sure is something that we will be paying attention to in the early spring time period. And we'll certainly look at the scholarship. We have some other work we're thinking about doing around scholarship opportunities within the university and how those scholarships are funded. So we will take that into our consideration around the actual audit subject as well as the scope of it. So thank you very much for the suggestions.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just follow
Please.
Chief Platt, thank you for that. I just think it's something that should be looked at in a snap way, not a full-blown weeks audit, but at least in a snap way. When we talk about the hiring freeze or pause, not only the current one, but remember I was also referring to the one that was to be initiated a couple of years ago that was proved to be unsuccessful. I'd just like to find out why it was unsuccessful, because we sure could have used some savings at this time from a couple of years ago.
Thank you, Regent Sviggum. Those are very, I think, very effective and appropriate comments. I'm just going to speak just to a minute on your first point on the Promise Scholarship concept, which I think now has taken on even a greater significance. And and again, kind of understanding more that audit is not simply a matter of accounting, but a matter of evaluation of the effectiveness of various approaches. On the front page of the Star Tribune today, it talked about, or there's a story about the prospect of making university education tuition free for people that fall into a certain category, households under $50,000, which is, I think, a bit of the Promise Scholarship in a more aggressive way. And one of the challenges that I have is if we're going to start dividing our students and treating people differently based on what we believe are objective factors, we should know that those objective factors are objective. And one of the concerns that I've had about the Promise Scholarship is, we'll take student A and say, well, she has access to her, parents, two-income family of $100,000, and yet there are 4 siblings, one with special needs and exceptional costs. That individual is not eligible for the Promise Scholarship, whereas another, student B, his parents have a high cash, high deductibility industry, and so they reflect a lower income level. And then even though he has access to far more familial support, he's not eligible for that. And if there is a way that we could conduct an audit, and I'm not thinking of a short one, I'm thinking something that would be significant, that would actually go and evaluate the bases for various students. Because again, when we set a tax code together, to put a tax code together for the population, that's income that you earn. You're not taxed on your parents' earnings, any other relative or anyone else's earnings. You're taxed on your own. But when we're calculating Promise Scholarship, or perhaps you being treated differently than your peers on tuition, it's being based on income that someone else earns and controls. And so it'd be maybe my concern is a very small percentage. Maybe it's only a 5 or 10% of students that are considered to have access to resources that they simply don't. But at the same time, maybe it's 40%, and in which case then I think we'd have pretty ineffective programs to raise money from one group of students to subsidize another group, even though we really haven't improved the equity at all, but created winners and losers, and eventually some jealousies among different populations. And I don't know that that's necessarily in the university's best interest. But before I make that statement, I would want to know what the actual reality is. And I think audit would be our internal audit function would be our best means of getting after that. I don't know, I'm not looking for a comment, Chief Auditor Clapp, but if you have one, I'd welcome it. And based on your physical response to that, I will assume that that one's not necessary. Ms. Flotten, do we have anyone else that would like to speak? Looks like
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Coomer, how are you?
All right. Thank you, Chair Rocha, members of the committee. Gail, companies that have traditionally hired remotely have had problems with identity theft issues in the hiring process. And now that everybody in the world is hiring remotely, I think that puts us in a risky position where we don't have a lot of experience dealing with it as we do bring people on board and hire remotely. So I think a look at our hiring best practices, remote hiring best practices would be worthwhile.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Further comments, thoughts, questions? Ms. Flatten, I'm not seeing any on my screen.
I do not either, Mr. Chair.
All right, well, thank you. Well, if things come up, people can certainly bring those forward. I turn that back to Chief Auditor Klatt.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. So members of the committee, we're going to move to the next schedule in your docket, which is your own committee work plan. And when we designed this work plan last summer, we were in the heat of the pandemic. Everything was kind of up in the air. And so we all made a conscious decision that we were going to try to keep a lot of unscheduled time on the committee agenda to incorporate emerging topics of interest to the committee and provide you. There had been requests from the committee over the years to have the opportunity to dive more deeply into particular audit projects, reports that you receive, to get more information and context and updates from the administration about remediation. And in those cases, our agenda, committee agenda, was already so committed that it was really hard for us to always accommodate those requests. So in discussion with the committee leadership, we decided we would, again, try to have more flexibility in the committee agenda to enable some nimbleness in terms of the topics being discussed. And so we thought this would be a really nice check-in point as we continue, as we start to plan for committee items in upcoming months, to check in with the committee and see if there are topics that you would like added to your committee agenda. And I would say outside of the ongoing or future discussion about our audit role in the academic or scientific misconduct, research misconduct arena, I would suggest that Regent Hsu's idea in our previous segment of this to get more information about those processes would fall into a potential committee agenda item. Would that be an accurate statement, Regent Hsu?
Regent Hsu.
Yes, I guess so. I mean, if you say so.
Does that give you a good answer, Chief Auditor Klatt, or do you want him to be more certain in his commitment to whether this meets his expectations?
My understanding, Regent Hsu, of what you were asking for is to get more information about the process that is followed, the number of incidents that happen, what happens to the results. So really to get kind of a briefing on how those two individual processes work within the offices that are responsible for them. Is that accurate?
Yes, but maybe a little more information than just what you just explained would be nice.
Well, Regent Hsu, this is, I think this is a great opportunity to be on the record as to what it is you're requesting. So when you say additional information, can you provide more clarity for the Chief Auditor and the rest of the committee of what type of information you would expect to come from that process or from that review?
Well, specifically, I originally raised the issue regarding the results of the During case, and in that one, you know, I understand that there were some issues related to what the actual report would actually brought up about how we handled this internally. And, you know, specifically, I'm looking for more information about, you know, cases like that. And, you know, obviously we receive some information about it, but it's never really discussed. So no one knows that, no one knows what we know. And sometimes we don't even know what we know. So I would like to specifically state that, you know, in the During case, there were issues related to how we handled this information internally over a period of years, which was never really disclosed to anybody. And in this case, you know, I think this being the Audit and Compliance Committee, that we have some greater information and touch points into those types of things. Does that make sense?
Chief Auditor Klatt, does that make sense?
We'll flesh it out.
All right, Regent Hsu, there's your response. So, Chief Auditor Klatt, do you want to entertain more input from
Absolutely.
folks at this point? Ms. Flotten, do we have others that would like to weigh in?
I do not see any additional raised hands.
I will just make a comment then that you know, this has been a process over these last I guess 18 months or so with this committee, which, you know, for me is my first opportunity to participate on this committee, and I've been very impressed with how you know, what I had perceived as being a little bit more of a rigid process of coming in and having audit results fed. I think Regent Kenyanya, you can speak for yourself, but, you know, in our conversations with Chief Auditor Klatt, there's been a clear desire to be responsive to what the committee and what the board as a whole wants to receive, and how the internal audit function, as well as our external auditor resources, will provide us the type of information that we're describing here. So I'm very pleased with that, and I've been very, very impressed with Chief Auditor Klatt and her team in trying to really be the best value added possible for the board's role as the governance body for the university. So thank you very much for that, Chief Auditor Klatt.
Thank you.
And so is this item, have you received what you've expected to receive or what you hope to receive, Chief Auditor Klatt, from this item? Or are we moving on from here?
We certainly can. I would just say, if as the days go by and whatever, if there are areas that you have interest in, or audit reports that you receive that you would like additional information on or further discussion on, please share that with Chair Rocha, and he will communicate to me, and we will get it on a future committee agenda. So.
Yeah, absolutely. As you know, sometimes difficult on the spot here in this discussion to come up with all the things that a person might have some questions about, but it's, you know, to me this feels very much like a sharpening the saw type enterprise, where we know now what we do very, very well, and now the question is, how do we continue to improve what we're doing both in audit and in compliance? And we've got a great team working for the university on this. So thank you very much.
Regent Rocha, I would that you made a comment there that I should reinforce, and that is this is not just audit topics, but if you have topics around the the topic of compliance or ethics, those are also under the purview of the audit committee, and you should feel free to raise those as well. And I work with Boyd to make sure we get compliance and ethics related topics on the agenda as well. So certainly feel free to raise areas of interest in that domain.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Regent Swigum has a hand raised.
Excellent. Regent Swigum, please.
Well, Mr. Chairman, as I think, Mr. Chairman, you're getting ready to close the meeting, it sounded like. So I think it just from our committee standpoint, we ought to recognize and give a compliment to Auditor Klatt and her team. It seems like we got a very good and clean report from Deloitte today. You know, I know all of the other outside groups that audit us, whether it be NSF or NIH or whatever groups, seem to give us extremely high marks. And I think today we should just give Gail and her team a little recognition for the great work they do for the university.
Thank you.
Yeah, Regent Swigum, absolutely appropriate. And yes, I mean, again, you get nervous when things are so good, but sometimes they're so good because they're so good. And I believe that that's the case here. And that stems a great deal from the fact that Chief Auditor Klatt has been doing this for a while now, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, so thank you very much. And please pass that along, both Mr. Coomer and Chief Auditor Klatt. Please pass that along to your teams. That the committee is very appreciative of the work you do, and very appreciative of your desire to continue to refine that to meet the needs of the committee. So thank you. Thank you, Regent Swigum. Excellent comment. Not quite ready to close the committee, but we're getting close. We'll turn then to information items. Chief Auditor Klatt, any comments on these?
I would just point the committee to pages 26 to 35. The information items include information on the regenerative medicine agreed upon procedures that Deloitte talked about earlier and the contract associated with that. Chief Compliance Officer Coomer has included the institutional conflict of interest report, which is a required annual report to the board. He also has his semi-annual compliance officer report, and the controller has the semi-annual controller's report. They all have meaningful information for the audit committee in terms of your oversight responsibilities, and gives you a flavor for all the work that goes on a day-to-day basis that creates the environment that Regent Rocha was just talking about, and Regent Swigum, that it's through all those day-to-day actions and practices and improvements that our central control operations are doing that creates the environment. So I would certainly spend the time to read through those.
Thank you very much. And Vice Chair Kenyanya, do you have any comments as we prepare to close?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually just had a brief question for Mr. Coomer, I think, around the conflict of interest report. Not really a specific question, but was hoping you could take a minute to speak to that in terms of who's subject to that and what kind of things you tend to pop up on there the most, so I could understand that a little better.
Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Regent Chair Rocha and Regent Kenyanya, members of the committee. So with the institutional conflict of interest report, that report really focuses on the 94 disclosures from our university's senior officials, and which we have a 100% compliance rate this year, and every year since at least since I've been here, but I believe even longer, of those individuals filling out those FDUOs, we call them, financial disclosure for university official. And then the report also speaks to any management plans, that conflict of interest management plans that are in place for a senior official as well.
Regent Kenyanya?
Yeah, in this particular report too, we mention In this particular report as well, we mention an annual review of the financial relationships the university has with business entities, and in the area of tech commercialization, gifts to the university, vendor contracts, etc.
Okay. Mr. Chair, that answers the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions from committee members?
Mr. Chair, Student Representative Buttar has her hand raised.
Student Representative Buttar, please.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. I was hoping that we'd be able to get, so I have a couple questions, but hopefully they can be answered quickly. And I was hoping that we could get first some contextualization for the numbers included in the U-Report statistics. I believe it's on the last or second to last page of the docket. By this, I mean how these numbers kind of compare to other years, considering that this was kind of a more unique year with more things going virtual.
Student Representative Buttar, that's an excellent question. Is this something, Chief Auditor Klatt, is this some data that we can provide some context? It looks like Mr. Kumar has got a response.
Thank you, Regent Rocha, Student Representative Buttar, and members of the committee. So typically, the university receives between 200 and 250 U-Reports a year. And generally, the mix of reports is very similar to what you see here. Of course, we have had an increase in the number of we'll call them COVID-related reports, work conditions, people wearing masks, not wearing masks, people maybe disputing whether or not they're an essential employee, especially at the beginning of this. Those were handled incredibly promptly by our HR department to resolve those questions and concerns individuals have. And that's one of the wonderful things about the U-Report system is even for something as unique and as new as COVID was, the situations that it created, our employee population knew they had a place to go, that if they had a concern, they could put it in and it would be looked at quickly and resolved quickly. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right, last call. Ms. Flotten, are we clear?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we are clear.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of our agenda today. Before we adjourn, I'll remind everyone that we have a very short break now. And the Finance and Operations Committee meeting will begin promptly at 9:30 a.m. There being no additional business before the committee, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.